Okay.
Okay, good morning, everyone, and nice to see you back after, well, my break. I missed the last couple of sessions. So we have a short new Gemara to start with. The Gemara of Ma'ameh, the next melachot on our list. I guess Ma'ameh would be translated roughly as sheaving and more accurately maybe as gathering or collecting. And as I wrote in my introduction on the WhatsApp group, the challenge of Ma'ameh is that the Gemara's whole addressing of the topic here in Shabbos is really only a couple of lines, and the other sugyas, very very important sugyas that deal with defining Ma'ameh, are scattered throughout Shas, and our job is to collect them. Did anyone get my pun, by the way, on the WhatsApp group? You did, Gary. Okay, at least one person did. Go and if you didn't notice it, please check your WhatsApp message. And I said we had to collect all the scattered sources of Ma'ameh. Okay, so the Gemara here is really only one of the Gemaras that deals with the topic, and I think I shared on the handout sheets, which I have here myself, most of the other Gemaras. Omar Rava, Haiman the Komif Milcha, Mimilchasa, Chayev Mishum Ma'ameh. Someone who harvests or collects salt from a what's it called where you if you want to collect the water, it's called desalination. What's it called when you want to collect the salt in English? The salt producing evaporation pool. So you create an evaporation pool where you let seawater in, you evaporate off the seawater, and the salt is left behind. So Rava says chayiv mishum ma'ameh, and Abaye says no, ein imor elo begudore karka. Imor is only with things which grow from the ground. So this is the Gemara, and Rashi explains it. So several questions spring to mind, obviously, when one learns the Gemara. The first one is, what is Ma'ameh? Exactly what the definition of Ma'ameh is. Secondly, why does Abaye think only with Gedolei Karka? Thirdly, what's Rava's response to that? Fourthly, when Abaye says it's only with Gedolei Karka, does he mean to say that therefore it's mutter if it's not from Gedolei Karka? Does he mean to say it's potter aval osa? And fifthly, of course, how do we paskin halacha? Which one is the psak halacha? Because over this issue of whether ein imor elo b'gedolei karka would obviously a massive number of nafkaminas would arise. Is it only things that grow from the ground? Is it everything else will make an enormous impact upon how we live our lives, and whether we have to be concerned about gathering things which aren't gedolei karka? Now, ostensibly, when one learns this halacha, one might think that Ma'ameh is not that relevant to us. We're not farmers, we don't go sheaving. However, certainly, if imor includes things which are not gedolei karka, then maybe this applies the whole time. Something spills and you collect it up. You have a jar of sweets, and they spill out Shabbos afternoon across the whole floor, and you gather them all together and put them back in the jar. Have you just transgressed the prohibition of Ma'ameh? You tidy the toys up. Have you just transgressed, kids scatter toys over the floor, you gather them up, have you just been over the Issa of Ma'ameh? So there's an enormous number of practical shilas that come out. We'll leave the Halacha L'maisa till the end, but we will get to it. But this is the sugya that raises this topic. So just really turning to our Mara Makomas, maybe actually I'll go straight to Mara Makom number 2. I put the Rif first, only because in chronological order the Rif comes ahead of the Rambam, but in terms of learning I put the Rambam in red, because the Rambam is an interesting Mara Makom to start. Hatovish Ulshin Ramazai Zerodim, etc. Let's jump to Hama'ameh. So the second line in the Rambam, Hama'ameh Oichlim. The Rambam here is in the 8th parak. He's talking about Shiurim. So he's giving the measure of how much you have to do in order to transgress a melacha on Shabbos, to be chayav for melacha on Shabbos rather. So he says the shear is krogogeres. So this is a general rule in the whole of Hilchos Shabbos. We're not going to go into it now. That the shear of melacha for food is a grogeret. If it's collecting food for an animal, it's a different amount. If it's for firewood, shear kadei levashel beitza, it's enough firewood to cook an egg, etc. And now we get to the last line of the Rambam. Ve'in imor elo begedolei karka. The Rambam says that imor is only with gedolei karka. So the Rambam here paskins like Abaye rather than like Rava. Now it's an interesting place for me to start the shir, by talking about how the Rambam paskins, that he paskins like Abaya not rather than Rava. But there's a reason why I'm starting with this point, because it opens up an interesting discussion. How can the Rambam paskin like Abaya rather than Rava? There is a general rule that the halacha is like Rava in all cases bar 6. Does anyone know the 6 cases where we paskin like Abaya?
Is it Yal Kagam?
Yal Kagam, excellent, yes.
Yeah.
I was pausing, Jeffrey, because I could see you moving your hands on the computer trying to unmute yourself, so I wanted to give you a chance. It absolutely is Yal Kagam. The Gemara says that the halacha is always like Rava against Abaya, other than in 6 cases, and it gives the initials of these 6 cases, Yud, Ayin, Lamed, Kaf, Gimel, Mem, etc. These are the initials of 6 cases where the halacha is like Abaya, rather than like Rava. So here the Rambam seems to be contravening this principle and passing like Abaya. Now there are 3 answers to this question. All 3 are interesting, but 2 of them are not really fundamental to the sugya. They're side answers. The reason I started with this question was because I wanted to get to the 3rd answer, which is interesting in terms of the sugya. Answer number 1 is that there is a girsa change over here, and that this is not Rava but Rabba. And this is answer I think is already brought in the Kesef Mishnah. Did I print the Kesef Mishnah? Yes. The question on the Rambam was asked by the Ramach, by Ramosha Cohen Luniel. Just a little bit of background. Luniel, as you will remember, is in the south of France, in the Montpellier region. The Rambam's works first spread amongst the Arabic-speaking Muslim world, which in those days meant Spain and North Africa all the way through to the Middle East. They then spread in the lifetime of the Rambam to the south of France, which had a lot of refugees, Arabic-speaking refugees from Muslim Spain. Spain had been taken over at that particular era by a fundamentalist Muslim sect, and that time of the golden era had come to an end, though it later resurfaced a little bit. And then many years later, 100 years later, the Ashkenazi world became fascinated by the Rambam. Luniel is a very important place. This South France, Provence community is very important in terms of learning the Rambam, because I'm over-exaggerating over here, but in the life of the Rambam, by and large, the Ashkenazi world is disinterested in the Rambam. They haven't yet discovered him. And by and large, the Muslim world is so in awe of the Rambam that there's not criticism in the same extent as about what he says. And the provincial community is a fascinating one because they are fascinated by the Rambam, interested in him, but also happy to criticize him. So there's a lot of important works from them. I just mentioned that in terms of background. So this comes from Moshe Cohen Miloniel, not originally one I particularly have heard of, but often quoted by the Kesef Mishnah on the Rambam. And he says over here, the Rambam's made a mistake in his Psak Halacha. How can he paskin like Abaya against Rava? The Kesef Mishnah gives one answer, very interesting answer, but not important in terms of a crowbar to open the sugya. He says that the girsa should be Rabba, not Rava, in which case it's a machlokus between Rabba and Abaya, and it's perfectly in line with the rules of Psak to paskin like Abaya, because Abaya is a generation later than Rabba, and the general rule is that halacha kabasroi, the halacha is like the later generation against the earlier generation, because the later generations have heard the arguments of the earlier generations and nonetheless disagreed with them, and therefore we will follow the later generation and have the benefit of having had more of the issue thrashed out. Because as part of a broader topic about to what degree do we say Yeridas Hadoros, the decline in the generations, and to what degree don't we say it, but within any one era, it's certainly in the era of the Amoraim, we'll follow the later one because they've had the issue more thrashed out. So Rabba and Abaya, Halacha Kabaya, one answer. There is a girsa like this. This isn't just a speculative girsa. There is such a text in the Gemara. Those of you who have a print of the Gemara which has Rabbeinu Chananel on the side will see that Rabbeinu Chananel is indeed Gores Rabba rather than Rabba. So this isn't just a speculative girsa. This is an actual one that we found. Okay, so this is one answer to the question. A second answer to the question, also interesting but less interesting in terms of our sugya, is that maybe this is one of the Yal Kagam. Don't forget the second letter in the list is Yud Ayin, and maybe Ayin stands for Imur, in which case this would be one of the 6 exceptions which we paskin like Abaya, not Rava. Even though I said there's only 6 cases where we paskin like Abaya against Rava, and the initials are given by Yal Kagam, what these initials stand for isn't always clear, and maybe the Rambam thought this was one of the cases that we paskin like Rava. But the third answer is the one that I was interested in, which is that maybe Rava also agrees that Ein Imor Elo B'Gedolei Karka, but Rava thinks that salt is Gedolei Karka. And this is the reason I asked this question over here, even though it's a side question as to how the Rambam paskins, that maybe Rava's view is that Rava also, maybe the Rambam's view is that Rava also agrees that ein imur elo b'gedolei karka, but he just thought that salt counts as gedolei karka. So in which case, when the Rambam here in source 2 says that the halacha is if ein imur elo b'gedolei karka, he's not paskining like Abaye over Rava, because Rava also agrees ein imur elo b'gedolei karka. He just holds that salt is gedolei karka. And this really gets to an important halachic point about exactly how do we define gidulei karka. And the key word here is, of course, the word gidul, that which grows from the ground. Doesn't mean literally that which organically grows from the ground, in which case salt is certainly not gidulei karka. Or does that mean that which emerges from the ground, in which case salt could be gidulei karka? In particular, not sea salt which is evaporated, but salt which is hewed from the mountainside. So stones and rocks and salt hewed from the mountainside. Would this be gedolei karka? Perhaps yes, it doesn't grow from the ground, but maybe that's not the key feature over here. The feature is it comes from the ground, and therefore that's enough. In which case, we have two ways to explain the machlokas Rav and Abaye. It could be the argument between Rav and Abaye is it only things that grow from the ground, or even things that emerge from the ground, which is gedolei karka? Or it could be even Abaye would agree that were you to hew salt from the ground, that would count as gedolei karka. But he's saying over here, you're not hewing the salt from the ground, you're evaporating seawater, salt water. In that case, it's not gedolei karka. And he distinguishes between salt and salt. And he says salt hewed from the ground is gedolei karka, and salt evaporated from seawater is not gedolei karka. And Rava's response would be salt is salt. So if salt is gedolei karka when it's drawn from the ground, then even though you found a clever way of not having it as gedolei karka, nonetheless, it fundamentally is a type of gedolei karka, and therefore would be chayiv in the melacha of imur. This is, by the way, important when it comes to questions of chilul Shabbos with gedolei karka, which haven't grown from the ground but are organic. So vegetables hydroponically grown in completely artificial and sterile environments. So in Israel, particularly, they're very big into this, and they have vegetables which grow completely removed from the ground in large. I've actually been to visit. They're very interesting, large vats, effectively chemical basins, sinks, large, lines of basins, in which they grow all sorts of vegetables. A lot of the bug-free vegetables that we get are grown in such environments, avoiding getting in bugs and insects. Are these called gedolei karka or not? So you could argue not. They're not made they haven't grown from the ground. Or you could follow Rava's argument, because one version of Rava's argument is that gedolei karka includes salt. Here you found a way of growing salt hydroponically by evaporating salt water. However, the normal way you get salt is by hewing salt from the ground, by mining salt. Since he holds that salt hewed from the ground is gedolei karka, therefore he says salt is salt, and therefore even though you found a way of getting it not from the ground, nonetheless that would be sufficient to make it gedolei karka. So this machlokas here has quite important ramifications. Number one, what does Rava hold about ein imur elo b'gedolei karka? Perhaps the Rambam learns that Rava holds that even though it hasn't grown from the ground, nonetheless it's called gedolei karka. And number two, perhaps the Rambam holds that even though some salt is called gedolei karka, Rava's chiddush is that even this salt, which was never hewed from the ground but was evaporated into the sea, is also called gedolei karka. This is an important first introduction to the Gemara. Abaye's rule, ein imur elo b'gedolei karka, may be agreed by everyone, and there simply may be an argument about how to define gedolei karka. So this is point number one. Before I go further, any questions about that? Otherwise, I'll.
Well, I know you said at the beginning, it was a preface that it's all over Shas, the Ma'ameh, but it does seem to be a very sort of fundamental introduction. If the mission is just talking about all the melachos and we're giving one example, is this like the best example it can give to start with?
So I'll say 2 points to you. The first point is the structure of Gemara is very difficult. It's very, very hard ever to make sense of why the Gemara chooses to say some things in one place, some things in another place. The Gemara is by and large a record of a free-flowing discussion in the Beis HaMedrash, and that's why Gemara wanders off the point. That's why, look, the Rambam set himself the task of being a systemizer. If you want to know Hilchos Shabbos, let's say you set out to know Hilchos Shabbos from the Gemara. So you say, okay, I'll learn Masechet Shabbos. Even at that point, you'll struggle because you have to know the whole Masechta, 150 pages or whatever it is. You'll have to know the whole Masechta in order to begin having found everything in Shabbos. You can't look at any one particular place and know Hilchos Shabbos. But that won't be enough. You'll also have to learn Masechet Eruvin, which deals with also aspects of Shabbos, Beitzah, which deals with halachas of Yom Tov, Yomo, which deals with Yom Kippur, and at that point you may and Moed Cotton, of course, which we saw, which deals with halachas of Chana Moed. At that point you may heave a sigh of relief and say, "I finished. Now I know Hilchos Shabbos." But of course, that's not the case. You have to know discussions that come up all over Shas that address Hilchos Shabbos. Why would Shabbos come up somewhere else? Because you may be learning Hilchos Brachos, and it'll get into discussion about how fruits grow on a tree, and the Gemara will bring a rye from Hilchos Shabbos, and that will be an important place. So the Gemara is a free-flow discussion. It doesn't always follow an ostensibly logical system of what it includes where. That's number one. Point number two is the Gemara always is interested in the extreme, not the norm. So actually, arguably, it's a very good place to start Ma'ameh, which is, we don't want to talk about boring cases of Ma'ameh. Boring classic Ma'ameh is, we know that, it's harvesting fruit. The interesting case is to push things to the boundaries. And therefore, if you want to talk about when Ma'ameh does and doesn't apply, you want to find the most extreme example of something which is questionably Gedolei Karka and demonstrate that this is a machlokas, Rav and Abaya. So perhaps it's actually a very good place to start the discussion by choosing an exotic scenario of Imor, and that's where we'll be pushed to the edge to think really hard about what Gedolei Karka means. So this is the first point in the sugya. Second point in the sugya is why should it only be Gedolei Karka? Let's say that we learn pshuto, that the argument is whether you need Gedolei Karka or not, or everyone agrees that you need it from Gedolei Karka. Why should that be the case? More than that, what is the rule that the Gemara uses to determine which melachos do or don't need to be Gedolei Karka? And just to remind ourselves, this isn't a machlokas that only comes up over here. We had exactly the same machlokas with koitzer when we discussed cholev, milking. Does koitzer only apply to not koitzer, parika, which is dismantling, dosh. Does dosh only apply to Gedolei Karka? Does it not apply to Gedolei Karka? We saw the discussion around the chilazon in the next Gemara in Ayin Daf Off in Ayin Daladom and base. There's a discussion with boyer, whether boyer is only Gedolei Karka, and so on and so forth. When it comes, for example, to cooking, no one suggests that cooking is only Gedolei Karka. Everyone knows that cooking is even not Gedolei Karka. There's a Gemara in Daf Lamed Chesam and base which talks about cooking an egg. An egg is not Gedolei Karka. We paskin cooking water is an isabishal water is not Gedolei Karka. So what are the parameters of which melachos do or don't need Gedolei Karka? And how do we understand that over here you do need Gedolei Karka and in other melachos you don't? The Gemara, for example, later seems to say that Rava holds that ein disha elo b'Gedolei Karka. So how can there be a difference? So here I printed the Meiri, and the Meiri says, this is in source 3, the Meiri addresses this issue, and he says, Afal pisha b'disha pasaknu she'ein disha elo b'Gedolei Karka, disha l'chud ve'imor l'chud. Don't compare melachas to melachas. Disha is one thing and imor is another thing. So this, not all melachas are identical in this respect. Some do need Gedolei Karka, some don't need Gedolei Karka. What is the unifying principle about whether they do or they don't? So I suggested last time when we looked at Mafarik, by the way, that was one Mara Mokum. Another Mara Mokum, just to remind you, was Rabbi Zobin ben Harambam that we saw last time. The Rambam was attacked by his critics who questioned how the Rambam, I'm slightly editing what Rabbi Zobin ben Harambam says, but applying it to Suki we met. How could the Rambam say that Disha is only with Gedolei Karka, and yet Cholev is Mishum Mafarik, when milking is not Gedolei Karka? And Rabbi Zobin ben Harambam replied to the questioner, who was Rabbi Daniel Abavli, and he says, I don't begin how you can understanding how you can ask this question. No one ever said that Mafarik is Dosh. We said that Mafarik is a tolda of Dosh. And a tolda is something different to the Av. The Av Melacha of Dosh is only with Gedolei Karka, but the tolda of Dosh, which is Mafarik, is not Gedolei Karka. Toldas and Avos are completely different things. So again, we see the same idea, though, that different melachos have different rules applying to themselves, and that Rabbi Zobin ben Harambam is answering, the Mafarik is different to Dosh, and therefore one needs Gedolei Karka, the other one doesn't. But again, what's the difference between the two? So last time we learned about this, I'll just remind you, I suggested a broad brushstrokes answer to the question. This time I want to suggest a detailed or more specific answer. Last time I suggested a principle, which is as we work our way through melachos, the 11 melachos connected with the production of bread, sidura de pat, we gradually move further away from the ground. So if we take the extremes, the first melacha and the second melacha, ploughing and sowing, are clearly melachos in the ground. Switch all the way to the end of the process, baking is clearly a melacha in food. It's got nothing to do with the ground. The ground is the history, but now I'm in the kitchen, I'm dealing with the food in front of me. Somewhere in between, the melachos shifts from being about food to being about things that, from being about ground to being about things that grow in the ground. So, for example, dosh, threshing, I'm not doing in the ground, but I'm doing in the produce of the ground. Ma'ameh, I'm not doing in the ground, I'm doing in the produce of the ground. I'm gathering stalks together. Bishul is clearly in the kitchen, it's clearly to do with food. So you have this sort of spectrum in which it gradually shifts from being about grounds and farming to about kitchen and food. And therefore the question is, at what point does this switch occur? At what point does the chashivos, the halachic significance and value of the object in front of me, move from being primarily about it being something that grew in the ground to being primarily about it being a certain sort of food? And when that shift occurs is when gedolei karka ceases to be a halachically relevant factor to the melacha. So ploughing is obviously only in the ground, sowing is obviously only in the ground. Ma'ameh is an example, it's a machlokas. Is it chashivos because it's something that grew from the ground in imor elu b'gedolei karka, or is it significance because it's a food product? When you're harvesting sheaves, are you doing work in a food product or work in the grounds? One can see the intuition of why there might be a debate about it. Once you're threshing, you're already off the farm. Collecting the sheaves is on the grounds of the farm. Threshing, you're already producing a food product. So maybe that's something where gedolei karka doesn't matter. Bishul, everyone would agree that it doesn't matter. And there's not even going to be a Gemara that tells us that Bishul is not dafka with gedolei karka. It never occurred to anyone to say it should only be with gedolei karka. So that's the transition, the spectrum that occurs as you move over from gedolei karka, from things which are linked to farming to things which are in the mishkan, to things which are in the kitchen. So that's a general answer to the question. A more specific answer to the question, someone pointed out to me, this is not my own insight, but I think it's a good point, is found in the language of the Rif. And this I printed in source one. The Rif says, Hama Ameh, Omer Rava, Haiman de Konosh Milcha Milcha Somechayiv, Mishum Ameh, Omar Baya ein derech imor bekach. He says ein derech imor bekach. So he alters with one word the language of the Gemara. He doesn't say it's just a rule, a sort of a gezeres hakosov, an inexplicable rule that imor is only with gedolei karka. But he says ein derech imor elo b'gedolei karka. It's not the way of doing imor other than with gedolei karka. Now, why is it that it's not the way of doing imor with gedolei? It's the way of doing imor is only with gedolei karka. Well, the answer is obvious. Because it's not normal that you should have to do imor with other food products. When I tried to give an example of a modern day shaila, I had to struggle. I said, if the cookies spit out of the cookie jar, if the sweets fall out of the sweet jar, then you'll have imor. But it's certainly not a standard part of the production process. Very few things. When you're producing something and manufacturing something, why should it be scattered? Whereas when it comes to agricultural things, we understand why it's scattered, because it grows in the spread out grounds, and now I need to gather it in as part of the production process. So the Rif is simply saying that the logic is as follows. Imor is a melacha, which is understandably part of the standard production process when it comes to agricultural things, but it's not part of the standard production process when it comes to other things. So therefore, there's a logic in saying that the melacha of imor should only apply in gedolei karka, and melach of imor shall not apply in things which don't grow in the ground. Whereas bishul, why should there be a difference? Bishul is part of the standard production process for all sorts of things. So I don't think the Rif is on a different page to what we said, but the Rif gives more of a reason or a svara. We already explained that the Halacha of the Shabbat are a partnership between us and Hashem. Meaning to say that you can't just look at the Mishkan and say it'll only be a malacha if it'll be identical to that of the Mishkan. Because then you'll never be able to extrapolate a malacha at all. And you'll say, well, just like in the Mishkan, this only took place with this animal dying, took place with ram's skins, but didn't take place with cow skins. Therefore, the malacha shouldn't be extended. when we say that, look, this isn't similar to what happened in the Mishkan, there has to be a rationale or a logic behind it. Why does it make a difference that it happened like this in the Mishkan, not that? You don't just say it happens in the Mishkan with, with people who with this tool, and therefore the malacha only applies to people who are that tool, or only was Levium who were doing the malacha of the Mishkan, not someone else, and therefore it should only apply to them. There would be a ridiculous distinction. It has to be. It's not enough just to find how it happened in the Mishkan, but how it happened in the Mishkan makes a difference. And the Rif here is helping us understand why it makes a difference. Because it happened in the Mishkan like that, because Imur is something which is only normal, it's only part of the standard production process to happen with things that grow in the grounds. And therefore, if you have something which doesn't grow in the grounds, there wouldn't be the melacha of Imur. This is the svara that the Rif adds to this, and it makes it a little bit more understandable. And I think it also helps us understand Rabbi Zobin and Rambam. Because the truth is, I struggled in Rabbi Zobin and Rambam. The Rabbi Zobin says something I understood very well, that we've spoken about again and again, that told us are not just subcategories of others, they are their own independent malachas. Great. But there's still a question in what Rabbi Zobin and Rambam says, which is why, though, should it be that with Disha, it's threshing, it's only in the ground, in Gedolei Karka, and Mefarik is even non-Gedolei Karka? And the answer is because threshing is threshing. Threshing is something that takes place, things that have grown in the ground. Mefarik is dismantling. That's something that can even take place in products which haven't grown in the ground. So there's the logic behind what Rambam and Rambam are saying. Is it part of the standard production process or not? So the Rif is a very, very important Rif that opened my eyes to a whole piece of Torah that I had missed, which is in adding that one word. He doesn't just say ein imur elu b'gedolei karka. He says ein derech imur elu b'gedolei karka. That you need to look at what's part of the standard production process. Is it part of the standard production process? And therefore, we have a better answer probably to what I was saying. It's not surprising. One came from me, one came from the Rif, which is that it's an extension really of what I was saying, which is that by Bishul, as the Rif points out, there's no reason Bishul should only apply to Gedolei Karka. We cook all sorts of things, whereas threshing, perhaps less so, and Imur certainly is a malacha which is only part of the standard production process when it comes to Gedolei Karka.
Is this the Rif is this the Rif's own opinion, or is it a different Gersa? Because he just seems to slip in the word, Derek.
Yeah, I don't know, but there's no evidence that it's the Rif's Gersa. So the Rif does this the whole time. When you open the Rif and you learn it superficially, he seems to just be a cut and paste of the Gemara. He just summarizes really the Gemara. So he cuts out all discussion and just basically prints the bottom line. And that's what the Rif did. But it's famous in the Rif that when you learn the Rif with care, here and there he slips in extra words, and that these words are significant. Those who followed the Rif were in awe of his brilliance. We nowadays learn the Rif and we don't see the massive amount in what he did, but this is an example of where one word in the Rif sort of opens our eyes to a whole insight into the Gemara. And it's very, very standard in the Rif. When you learn the Rif well, that's what he did. There were yeshivas where they changed the whole curriculum after the Rif was produced to learn Rif, not Gemara, amazingly enough. On the side of the Rif is printed Rashi. Now this Rashi is not a genuine Rashi. It's a later figure, sometime in the 1200s, went through Rashi and cut and paste from Rashi and tweaked Rashi to make the Rashi we have on the Gemara fit the Rif. So he basically shortened Rashi, and wherever the Rif said the line in the Gemara, he put Rashi on it. And the reason this happened was because so many people were learning only the Rif, that there was a demand to have a commentary of Rashi on the Rif so that people could learn just the Rif. See, and this became literally the curriculum in some yeshivas. So the Rif was a masterpiece of adding words in to add insight, and this is an example of that. So I don't know for sure, but I have no reason to assume it's an alternative Gersa in the Gemara.
Right.
Okay, we'll stop there, and Imiyat Hashem on Tuesday we'll have Shiur. I just want to make a quick appeal, which is the base. The incredible student program is doing fundraising today for their learning program. It's for students, it's giving them basic medrash and so on. So please forgive me. I'm going to post a link to make donations on the Beit WhatsApp group. This is not an appeal for the Beit, which we're part of. It's an appeal for the student base, which is not part of NER, but which sits on NER's site and is a fantastic program. It's a cross-communal program, not connected with any one community, but very closely associated with our community, and does a massive service for students who are back from yeshivas. So if anyone can make a donation, a personal appeal to please do so. And I wish everyone a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Garth.